The Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper. And now, Coach Bill Clark.
Welcome. It's the Bill Clark Show, Episode 3, presented by Dr. Pepper, Pat Smith, along with Landrum Roberts. The coach, Bill Clark. And Coach Clark, we had week 0, week 1 in the books. Just your overall impressions of a very impressive week 1.
Yeah, starting Thursday all the way through Monday night. Some really great games. We had some blowouts. We had some close games. Really kind of, everything you'd want in that opening weekend.
Specifically, week 1, who impressed you, Coach?
Well, let's start with the in-state schools, UAB, Alabama, and Auburn. I think all three impressed. Big things in week 1. How do you handle 12 men on the field and personal fouls and communications? Obviously, we saw some communications in the Alabama game. Wasn't really them, maybe it was Western Kentucky, but they had to adapt. And I think from listening to the coaches, from watching those games, sounded like they handled them very well. So good starts against maybe not great opponents, but good starts for all three.
Who were you disappointed in week 1?
Well, I think, we've got to look at, just Oregon, probably disappointed everybody nationwide. That was a closer game, and I talked about it on Monday. I have a player on that Idaho team, so, kind of pulling for him. Disappointed for them. Clemson, maybe not in the ways people think. I think if you watched that game early, you thought, okay, Clemson's got a shot. And Georgia's defense, which we'll talk about later, just, didn't give up anything. And I know Clemson thought maybe they had a chance in that game. Game was not close, which tells you maybe not so much bad about Clemson, but how good maybe Georgia is.
One thing that was great over the weekend, and that is having a nice cold Dr. Pepper during all these games, and what Dr. Pepper and Jimmy Lee, they do for not only college football, but a major presentator of this show.
Yeah, I think if you're watching college football, you're seeing those great Dr. Pepper commercials. Locally for us, Dr. Pepper, Buffalo Rock, and those guys, man, what they do for college football, what they do to support our show and college football in general.
All right, Smart Banks, Smart Call of the Week. And let's go here. Let's talk about something that you mentioned on Monday's 3-Man Front with me and Landrum, and it was the conversation about Clark Lea, an impressive win by Vanderbilt. But I have to ask you, Coach, what took so long for Clark Lea to take over the reins as the defensive coordinator?
That's a good question. I think, especially when you hadn't been a head coach, play to your strengths. You're an offensive coordinator. That's how you got the job. Clark Lea, you're a defensive coordinator. You got the job. Now, I do believe it takes this whole team. It's hard to do all the head coaching duties and not do, and not have somebody to help you manage that. But he's still got to be the defensive coordinator. Now, they made some other good, swaps and got a quarterback and some other things we discussed. But the main thing is do what you're good at. We say the same thing about Hugh over at Auburn. Get more involved with the offense. That's your background. That's what you know. Play to your strengths.
Well, and in Clark Lea's case, you had the luxury of having 3 years of not doing it and then coming back and taking over that role. Hugh Freeze, we know that job at Auburn. You weren't going to have that luxury.
No, I think, Clark's lucky. Let's just be honest. He's at a place probably that gives you a little bit maybe longer to make mistakes. Not that he hadn't done a good job in some other things, but you saw it in the win. He got involved, found a way. Hugh does not have that long. Coach Freeze, I should say, does not have that long. So probably the right move to get more involved quicker. And obviously they played really good in the opener when we're talking about Auburn. Played really good in the opener, so we'll see how that goes from here on out.
In regards to these coaches that not only be the CEO of their football team, but also taking on that major coordinator role, how difficult is it in this day and age of football to be able to do both?
It's hard. You've got so many things we were doing before. Now we've added NIL, which is the head coach's baby. Now, we could sit here and talk a lot about NIL, and I think there's so many guys that have never been fundraisers. Those guys that have had the varied backgrounds, I'm going to go back to kind of my world of being an athletic director in high school, having to raise funds for so many different projects, because that's what you're doing. You're having to go get boosters involved to get money for this NIL, and then you're the play caller. So you've got to be really involved. You've got to have somebody that believes like you do, who's in that coordinator role. But if you're not involved, and especially when that's how you got the job, I think you're doing a disservice to yourself and your team.
And I think all of these coaches, they would say, well, I have the guy that I trust, that guy who fills that position, whether you're offensive background, defensive background. But in the case of Hugh Freeze, bringing in a guy like Derek Nix, who knows the insides, the outsides of that offense and his time there in Oxford, also having Kent Austin there as another guy that you can confide in, you can bounce things off of. But I think it's ideal. But meanwhile, we've seen the flip side of it with a guy like Jimbo Fisher, who called offense forever, and sometimes those coaches don't know when to relinquish control.
So I would say do not call it just yourself. What you want is somebody who believes like you do, but you're so involved that it all runs through your headset. And you know, let's use Nick Saban. You didn't see a lot of where he was verbalizing we're in tight flex, quarters coverage or whatever that is. But they knew Sunday through Saturday, it was his plan. That's how I felt. Somebody verbalized it, but there would be a no, I don't like that. Between series, he's telling them, this is what I want. And, I use Troy, for example. When we started out in 2014, we had two plans. We had a drop 8 plan with a 3-4 look, and we had a man-free plan. They go right down the field, we're in man-free. We immediately, I said, all right, we're going to 3-4, drop 8. Changed everything. That's the involvement you want. Even though Coach Walker was making the calls, we were doing those things together, and I could talk more on that later. But it's got to be this symbiotic relationship, but you've got to be very involved in everything, but specifically to your strength.
Well, Clark Lea and Hugh Freeze both. That is the Smart Bank Smart Play of the Week, and I know Smart Bank, a proud sponsor of this program.
Yeah, once again, the things we love, and we're going to repeat a lot of things to our listeners every week, but, I think the message is the same. The smart guys at Smart Bank are people people, small town banking, which I think that's what we want. Somebody, when you call somebody, they answer. These guys are local. They're really getting in Alabama. They were in Tennessee, but they're really doing a great job. Guys that came over from Compass Bank and doing what they're doing at Smart Bank now, really good folks.
Webb Concrete brings you the building blocks to victory. The matchup of the week is in the Big House. The first time since 2006 that an SEC team has been in Ann Arbor. That's when Vanderbilt went and played the Michiganders. And it was 1965, the last time a ranked SEC opponent has played Michigan there at Michigan. And Georgia, 10th in 1965. Knocking off Michigan. A little bit of history there, Coach.
Some good history. I love history.
We all remember that Georgia team.
That 1965 Georgia team. Wow. That was something else. That was before the G on the side of the helmet. What do you think? Michigan taking on Texas. Big game.
23 straight home wins, which is what, as a coach, that's what I think about. How big is it that they play at home and how well do they play? They've won 23 straight. Now, it's all about who's coming in there and this opponent in Texas, who it has played in these games, has played in the big games. You got a quarterback, which is we always start with that, this quarterback that's been in the big games. Ewers, they got this great O-line. I think they got skill everywhere. We've talked about they lost the running backs. So from a Texas standpoint, offensively, I think they've got the weapons. We got to see what they can do from a run game standpoint. Defensively, we've got a new co-coordinator coming in with a lot of multiplicity. How will they stack up to Michigan coming out of that huddle, the big O-line? That's going to be different than, what they practice against every week.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I like what you said about having guys that have been in big games, but specifically Quinn Ewers in Bryant-Denny Stadium last year in that game, and what a performance it was by him and the entire Texas offense and what they were able to do against Alabama, especially at that position. Do you want that guy that has experienced that specifically at the quarterback position? I know it's important for all of your players to have at least had a taste of it. But for a guy like Quinn Ewers in the Big House, what he's going to be faced with on Saturday, does that give you extra confidence as a coach?
100%. That is the guy that we can see nerves out of. The rest of the people don't see the nerves quite so much, but the quarterback, you can see it. He's been there. You hear Coach Sark talk today, press conference, or early in the week I heard him in the press conference talk about how calm and how cool he is. You see it in how he plays, and he's been in those big games.
In regards to this big game, this is a whole new Michigan team. They got so many guys they're trying to replace, and an SEC team is coming knocking on the door. I'm like you guys. I don't see Texas being, oh, wow, we're playing in front of 110,000 people. That's not a big deal to me, and I think Texas is going to be ready for the task.
I do. I think, we're just talking about pick 'em. I think we'd probably, even in that, with that record, I think we would be picking Texas. I do think Michigan, we don't know who they are. They've got this walk-on quarterback. If you go, great story. He had leukemia, COVID. He walks on. Probably would have been really recruited if he had been well, et cetera. Great story. We don't know a lot about him. What they do offensive and defensively is different, though. You got Wink Martindale, if y'all remember that name. He was with the Giants. Now, is he zero blitzing? When we say zero blitzing, that means, as y'all know, there's nobody high. If you watched them any last year, which I got to watch a little bit of everybody, I watched them, a lot of pressure, which is different. The offense is different. You saw what the head coach did as an OC last year by himself. You know, Coach Harbaugh wasn't there, even though we know this was Harbaugh stuff. So, anyway, there's a lot of great storylines there. It's going to be a great one to watch.
I guess the big question is, does Michigan have their signs already?
That's a good question. You know, have they been to practice? You know, have they been on their sidelines? Good question.
Do you think Sark is kind of looking over his shoulder this week in Ann Arbor?
Probably.
Maybe paying attention to where they're staying in the hotel,
Right.
or who's taking some selfies and so forth.
Well, if you did not hear last week's broadcast, we discussed those things earlier about people showing up at your hotel. We know they've shown up on their sidelines, probably a lot more than anybody knows. All right, talking about Webb Concrete, obviously locations in Oxford. You got Oxford Showroom, Oxford Ready Mix, Heflin, Roanoke Ready Mix Center, Pell City, Birmingham, Homewood. Webb can help you build your house from the foundation up.
All right, the Alabama Power 5 of the week. This is when Coach Clark gives us his thoughts on not only the Power 5 of the week, but the rest of college football. Who might be knocking on the door to perhaps getting that invite come the wonderful December date of trying to figure out who the expanded college football playoff is going to be.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's cool about this, I don't know that we're going to be totally different from a lot of folks. I talked about you guys on Monday. I thought y'all were right there on it. So let's talk about ours. So one, we'll start with Georgia. Dominant performance. I think people may have moved Ohio State. I did not. I just from all their skill, all their talent. Once again, I think time will tell on that. Texas, look forward to this game against Michigan. Alabama was dominant as we thought they were. Ole Miss and Notre Dame could have been 5 or 6. I went with Notre Dame, what they did at Texas A&M, who I was impressed with. It was a great game. We'll talk more about Notre Dame later. Let's talk about the other, as we say, 7, because we got a 12-team playoff.
Yeah.
Ole Miss could have been maybe 5. Penn State. Oregon, that was probably one of our biggest disappointments.
So what do you think really happened in that game? I mean, because Dylan Gabriel put up good numbers.
He's 41 to 49.
Yeah, he put up fantastic numbers, but was it just the fact that they were lethargic? They weren't taking Idaho seriously? Because when Idaho was able to score on, I'm using air quotes, trick plays in regards, they didn't seem ready for that game. Talking about Oregon.
Yeah, and I think the question was how much did they not score? I think defensively, those points.
You can put up all the yards you want to, but at the end of the game, it's about scoring.
7 of 16 on third downs for
right,
Oregon.
Right. So I think we all got question marks, and that got them bumped down the, we'll see. Obviously,
so you got them at 8 this week.
Yeah, we'll get a win. I got them at 8. Michigan's at 9. This will be the big tale this weekend, which we talked about. Missouri, obviously, they played one of my former coaches in the first game, Jody Wright. And those guys, but Missouri with a big win, game 1. Utah, Tennessee. Does Tennessee move up? Man,
Nico was impressive.
Very impressive. Look forward to watching them against NC State this weekend. And Oklahoma, was impressive. They had the new co-DC come in there. And I like.
So that's going to be a pretty good game down at Jordan Hare.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's going to be. That's going to be a great weekend, isn't it?
That's cool.
As we look ahead.
That's fantastic.
All right, so let's talk about Alabama Power. We've discussed about how philanthropic they are, how involved they are, and anytime I'm doing a give back, whether I'm talking about Coach Safely or Children's Harbor, all these different people, you always hear about Alabama Power being involved and giving back to the community. Appreciate them.
Donahue Chevrolet's drive for success. So, Coach, let's talk a little bit about the Heisman Trophy. It's never too early to talk about the Heisman Trophy.
I guess not. We've had one game.
Yeah, two
not?
games for some teams.
Yes,
like
not?
Florida State.
Nobody's winning it there.
You're not putting DJU in your Heisman Trophy top 10?
Yeah, they were too easy a target for our negatives of the week, so I don't think I want to pile on with
All right,
those
so
guys.
give us some names. Who you like so far?
Yeah, obviously Milroe to all of us in state, but I think nationally, he's got so much to like. Just as how he interacts with his teammates, but throw, run. You got to see some quarterback run out of him. So super impressed with him. I think Carson Beck. Because I think one of the things with Heisman, we always talk about teams that win. So Georgia, the way they play. Obviously, he's going to be up there. He manages the game very well. I did see him make some scrambles, so you saw his athleticism. The name that's probably popping up all over, I think, if we went to Vegas, we'd probably see this name, Cam Ward. What an impressive performance for Miami. I know there's some knocks on Florida, but, in the swamp, he was so cool. Maybe a little too cool for school a couple of times for my taste as a coach, but very impressive.
Now, wait a second. What does that mean?
when you kind of just ease your way out of bounds the way he did. But, hey, it's all about the performance. So I think
it's all about the you. They're bringing that swagger back.
Listen, if he was my guy, I would say he was protecting himself. So.
Okay. Because I was going to say,
I would definitely want him on my team.
Okay.
Yes, let's answer that.
Okay.
Ewers, surrounded by a great cast of characters.
And you notice
Very
he's
cool.
better since he cut his mullet. Have you noticed?
Yeah, that probably did it. Probably did it.
little
That
bit
probably
more
fixed it
aerodynamic.
all.
Look good, play good, right?
Yeah.
Dart at Ole Miss.
Yeah.
What I like about him once again,
Toddy.
this is the guy that can throw and run. Those are the guys when I start talking about defending 12. When I said, all right, can he run? Can he throw? Should be throw, run. He can do both.
It's been incredible his development as a quarterback.
Yeah.
Since he's been there in Oxford.
Yeah, he's gotten a lot better, and they do the things offensively that fit him. So we could talk about that with Auburn, even though he's not necessarily a Heisman candidate. But when you have an offense that fits your skills, which is what good coaching is, but he's obviously impressive. We've got Gabriel out at Oregon. Once again, I think he's in a system that's fit him, and he had, I guess, good efficiency number. I'm gonna talk about Gordon real quick from Oklahoma State. I know he had the DUI, but he's probably the number one running back candidate out there. So,
let me ask you about a left-handed quarterback. Does that matter at all? I mean, obviously, left tackle, right tackle, yeah, it would matter. But I'm just curious about Dylan Gabriel or someone that's left-handed. Have you ever had a left-handed quarterback? And is there anything that we should know about as just guys that watch football that does it really matter if he's right-handed or left-handed?
it really doesn't. I do. It's always funny if you
Does
look
the
at
spin of the ball come off differently to the wide
it always
receivers?
seems softer. If you ever noticed a left-hander, it seems like there's more touch, but I don't know that there's really anything that I would know or have ever heard anybody talk about.
that
That's
a
the
bad
only thing I've
question?
ever. No, I think it was a great question. The thing I've heard, and this maybe it was quarterback specific, but when you go from a right-handed quarterback and then you have to replace him with a left-handed quarterback, receivers saying just getting used to the spin coming out of his hands. I don't know if that's just.
It always seems like left-handers have a little bit more touch. It's a little bit softer throw for whatever reason, but we could probably go to baseball and go, man, there's left-handers throw just as hard as right-handers. So I don't know that that's a thing. Just from having a left-hander, we didn't really notice a lot. Just seems like there's a little different touch to it, so maybe.
And it's interesting, of all the names that you brought up, and we always talk about you have to have an elite quarterback at any level to win. Doesn't matter if it's middle school football, high school football, college, pro, you got to have that quarterback. You've only got one running back on the list. I mean, it's not a shot. It's just the fact that this is the way the offenses go now. And when you talk about the Heisman Trophy, it's now all about the quarterbacks.
It is all about the quarterbacks. You mentioned a guy, Sanders at Colorado. I think that's a guy we'll see too. I don't have him on the list. Once again, athletic, can throw, can run. I had that conversation. We'll go back in some history, 90s. Bob Stoops and I were talking, and I said, what if the guy that you were defending could really run it like a running back? Oh, we'd defend him the same way. He had just not seen that. We were seeing that in high school. I said, wait a second, this guy runs like a running back but throws, maybe not like Peyton Manning, but throws really good. That's the evolution of the game as we all know it. We were seeing that in high school. That kind of trended up to where we are now, where the guy can really throw it, really run it, and it's designed that way. And when I'm telling you from a defensive standpoint, that's like defending 12 guys.
That's why if you're going Vegas odds right now, I think the value, not necessarily the value pick, but the smart money would be on a quarterback like a Jalen Milroe and his skill set and what he can do not only with his arm but also with his legs, because the two, they help each other out. Think about Jalen Daniels, what we had last year with LSU. Incredible player. Some of the other past Heisman winners, whether it was RG3, whether it was a Cam Newton, those guys that had the multifaceted game, I think that those typically that gives them an advantage when it comes to Heisman voters, not just the quarterback position.
Yeah, it's just they're so dynamic. If we just thought about staying alive, if you've got a rush coming at you and you're not really feeling them, you're looking down the field as we see the evolution of Milroe, I think that's what it looks like. Now, those guys have got to stay well. They got to stay well, but it seems like those guys can because they evade the rush better than those guys that were just stuck in the pocket. So they can get out as long as they're smart in how they run the ball.
So, Coach, you and I are about the same age, and when you think back at the evolution of the offense, I will never forget when Steve Spurrier brought his pass-happy offense to the SEC, and then Terry Bowden replicated that at Auburn. People going, you're never going to win in the SEC having 5 wideouts.
Yep.
You're never going to do that. And then you go from that into the RPOs, and then you go to the hurry up, what Hugh Freeze brought in the early 2010s, at Ole Miss. And now what you're looking at these dual threat quarterbacks. They really are dual threat, not just, hey, I can run a little bit, but they design offenses like around Jalen Milroe. That's what Kalen DeBoer is doing now.
Yeah, and so I'm just from when I give you true history, and this is where we're talking about, there was the throw game with Spurrier. Kentucky came in with Hal Mumme with a throw game that was even more so, less run game,
the air
more
raid.
throw game.
Yep.
Now, here's where the change came in, though. High school ball, believe it or not, we got the spread. Some of us got the spread before. There wasn't many people with a spread. We had it in the quarterback run game that we developed in high school, matriculated up. And I could name some coaches that I met with, and I said, how are you defending this? They had no answer. We could talk about 4 down versus 3 down and trying to defend a running quarterback. We were seeing it. So what do? You learn to do it. It's like I used to talk about 12 personnel, the 2 tight end stuff that was in the pros. Well, there was college coaches that understood that. So as high school, we didn't see 2 tight ends, but we saw the spread before they did, which was spread run, where the quarterback could run all the zone read stuff and they could still throw it. That's the move that went up, which is where we are now.
And if we want to go back to maybe a value pick when it comes to a Heisman contender, another quarterback, Shedeur Sanders of Colorado, and what he does with his game, he's a dynamic guy. He's showing up on some of the Vegas boards as far as Heisman contenders. Got a huge game coming up this weekend, Coach, where he's got to go to Lincoln, Nebraska and take on a Matt Rule team who's expected to have a really good defense.
Yeah, 2 things there. One, I think he was – I go back to when I really got to see him was against TCU, probably when he wowed all of us. Great bloodlines with his dad. How good are they around him offensively? So that maybe makes him even maybe a little bit better. He's also done it at a different level where he didn't have that help. I think that helps, as we saw from Cam Ward. Coach Rule, knowing very well they're always going to be good defensively. They've got the new quarterback, even though we're not talking about this right now necessarily with Heisman. That's going to be another great game to watch. Yeah, so let's talk about Donahue right now. Obviously, we've said a lot about Donahue. They were a big sponsor for us at UAB. I've bought 2 cars personally. Those guys do a great job just helping their customers and being interactive with them. I think DonahueChevrolet.com is the site to go to. So those guys are terrific and really guys you need to check out.
Radiance Technologies Defense of the Week. We're going to highlight each and every week, thanks to Radiance Technologies, in regards to the top defenses or some of the top defenses you saw, Coach, firsthand or on film.
Yeah, so first, Georgia. And I don't know if they get enough credit for what a great job they do top to bottom. If we talk about tackling, physicality, depth, multiplicity of a scheme where you got man coverage and zone coverage. I think early in that game we thought, all right, Clemson has got a chance. And, I think you're getting all the negativity, and that's kind of what I talked about earlier, that it looks like it's this big negative on Clemson. I go the other way where I say Georgia's just that skilled, that talented, and that well coached. So Georgia, man, hats off to them. What a great job they did. Great preparation. Now, secondly, Notre Dame, if you got to watch them against Texas A&M. Few things that stood out. So let's get technical for a minute.
Absolutely.
Al Golden, y'all know that name, former Miami head coach, did a terrific job. They played a lot of man coverage. So if you're looking and you're sitting there and you're looking at a 4-2 box, you got 6 guys in the box against 4 wides. So that's how you negate a running game. But what does that mean? That means you probably got 4 guys on an island. They played man coverage throughout the game. You saw them get in some bear look, which means, we got a 5-1 box. Still same things. Now, they did some different things. They dropped back in some zone pressures and what. But throughout the game, a lot of man coverage. Give them credit for sticking with that, which stopped the run game in a hostile environment. I guess a new OC, but who has done a great job when he was at K-State. A lot of great talent. So Notre Dame, great job, Coach Golden. Now, let's talk about Radiance Technology. So if you go back to our win against BYU in the Radiance Technology game down in Shreveport, Bill Bailey, the owner of Radiance Technology, Alabama guy from Asheville, Alabama, the owner of that company, they do laser technology that literally shoots down drones, but supported us in that game and supported Children's Harbor last year, our Children's Harbor game. Just great folks. I've got to go up there and speak to them in Huntsville, defending our country. So appreciate what those guys are doing for our country and for our show.
All right, speaking of the state of Alabama, UAB, impressive win in game number 1 of the season. Monroe, Louisiana, Malone Stadium, 6 o'clock kickoff. There on Saturday, Coach, and two programs, 2 coaching staffs, some players. That there's a lot of familiarity. between the two?
Yeah. So first, I've got family on both sides. I've got, we can go Lyle Henley, the strength coach, and Tristan Henderson. I just don't want to leave guys out. Henley Brigham, the running back coach. Those were my guys I signed and recruited. And so getting to see UAB in the game one, very impressive. Not against a very good team, but they did what they were supposed to do. Now they go down to Monroe with Coach Vincent, who is my OC. There's a bunch of guys. I think there's been talk about how many guys are on that team from UAB. What else would you expect? Coach Vincent was the head coach there. So we're going to see. It's going to be a good game, going to be a good test for UAB. They're going down and playing at 6 o'clock in Monroe. I'm sure both teams held stuff back for each other. So should be a big test for UAB going down there in a hostile environment.
What was your takeaway, though, quickly on the defense? Because we know that's the side of the ball that the Blazers really struggled in 2023.
Yeah, I think let's be honest, and I think this would probably be a whole show where I could talk about a defensive head coach versus an offensive head coach. Did you do both? Were you on both sides of the ball? I think defensively would be the question for UAB. We saw it last year; they gave up a lot of points. What did they do? Did they simplify? And when you simplify, that maybe makes you better. Maybe you tackle better, you get lined up, but does it leave you open for some other things? So this will be a test against somebody who I know offensively, and I know what job Bryant Vincent's going to do. So this will tell you a lot about them as we go into week 2.
All right, since we're talking about defense, I wanted to ask you, because a lot of LSU fans, they were upset because they lost the other night to USC, but you immediately heard the spin from people down in the Bayou saying, well, you know what? This defense is better, but when you start diving into the technical and you start looking at the statistical categories, last year this was like a 108 type defense out of 132 programs that played Division I football. They averaged giving up around 6 yards per play. We're talking about per play.
Right.
The other night against USC, they gave up 7.5 yards per play. So as a defensive coach, and you're looking at that the other night, did it to you jump out that this is a vastly improved defense at LSU, or is it just too early to call that?
I was very unimpressed last year. I know Coach Baker. He was at La Tech.
Yes.
We played against each other. I watched Missouri a lot last year. So confidence in what I've seen from him through the years that they will be better. I didn't think they were very good, so I thought they were better. I really did. I thought they were better. We've got to compare them, though, to USC. That's the question. How good is USC offensively? So that's why I always say we all want to jump into these things on week 1, and it's fun. It's fun to discuss. How good is USC? Obviously, that quarterback, there was a reason they weren't so worried about the other one going to the pros, and Williams. I think they knew they had a good one, and we saw it in the bowl game. How good are they? Time will tell. But you gave the statistics. So statistically, not better. I think they'll be better.
That's why I asked you your eye test. From an eye test standpoint.
I thought so. But what we saw statistically, I'm just really, a lot of mine is going on USC and what they've done offensively and what I saw out of them.
And you think about a lot of the SEC, we did see Texas A&M take on a quality opponent. You mentioned Notre Dame. Yep. We know that Florida faced off against Miami, Georgia versus Clemson. But for a lot of these SEC teams, even the ones that we expect to be in the top tier of the league and contending for a college football playoff berth, Coach, we still don't know a ton. You do have new faces on both sides of the ball. And we were talking about during the show this week, the FCS opponents that they played, there wasn't much resistance. I think the SEC set records this weekend as far as margin of victory.
You hit the nail on the head. And I think this is one of the things we're going to see. So let's think of those bottom FCS guys who are getting stolen or taken or elevated, whatever we want to use, to the next team through NIL or whatever that is. Those guys then move up. And I told a story off camera about a number 3 quarterback. I won't give names. A number 3 quarterback was making close to $100,000 as the number 3 from
number
NIL.
3.
He was a
Wow.
number 3. So that's what's going on out there. Guys now are willing to sit the bench to make money. And so I think we've got we've got these guys moving up. And what does it hurt? It hurts the competition down on that bottom level. Once again, we're happy for these guys, and it's great these guys are getting to make money. But I think we're seeing this difference. Look at those scores. How many times did we see the 60s and the 70s to 0? So that's something's happening there. That's what I attribute it to.
I want to go back to the number 3 quarterback making $100,000. Those guys even have to run?
Yeah, that's a good question. But so the choice was, do I go start?
Yeah.
Or do I stay at number 3 at a great school?
Yeah.
Who wins? and make $100,000.
It sounds like a pretty sweet gig.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
it's
third string in the NFL is a pretty good one.
yeah. no
Well, it's
doubt.
about time for us to crack open one of these nice cold Dr. Peppers. And I know Jimmy Lee and the fine folks there at Dr. Pepper, they bring us this show each and every week.
Yeah, we appreciate those guys so much. Obviously, what Dr. Pepper, Buffalo Rock, what those guys do for us and sponsoring our show and for college football.
Thanks again. This is episode number 3. We have not been canceled yet, so thank you so much for downloading the show and keeping us all happy during college football season. For Coach Bill Clark, Molly Robinson, my partner Landrum Roberts, I'm Pat Smith. Have a great football weekend.
This has been The Bill Clark Show, presented by